Any other guests? How about visiting Rotarians? Light schedule today. I'll pass around the fine basket. All right, I missed everybody last week. Hope everybody had a good Easter if you celebrate. We had a good Easter in our house. My kids had a good Easter. The baskets filled with candy, egg hunts, multiple egg hunts. I don't even remember doing multiple egg hunts when I was a kid. Of course, all these eggs are also filled with candy. What I didn't realize, but it kind of makes sense, is that Easter is the second biggest candy holiday after
Valentine's Day.
Halloween.
Halloween. Not Valentine's Day.
Makes sense when you say it. My kids, like all kids, of course, love candy. They go for the sour stuff or the Nerds gummy clusters. You guys know what these things are, Nerds gummy clusters? I go for the chocolate though, so whatever they don't eat, on the chocolate side, I get to take advantage of. So, of course, I get to eat on it for the day, and then we put it in the candy drawer, and literally they forget about it. It's like out of sight, out of mind. They've never seen candy before, which helps me out because then I get to go in there and eat the rest of their candy, a couple pieces every day. But we've all got our favorites. So I go chocolate, dark chocolate. Pair it with a little bit of peanut butter and a Reese's cup and that perfect little ratio that they know how to do. But like any, I want to dig a little deeper on the Reese's history here. So, like any good American brand over the years, Reese's has had to innovate. Okay, they want to dominate the candy market. So, about 50 years ago, H.B. Reese invented the Reese's cup and proceeded to sell the company to Hershey's. So Hershey says, okay, how can we make more money with the Reese's cup? The Reese's family stayed pretty loyal and connoisseurs throughout the years, especially with his grandson, Brad Reese. This is all going to make sense in a second. Brad is a classic fan of the cup, but has also grown into all the other different products that Hershey's has managed to innovate with Reese's products. So you've got eggs, you've got mini cups, you've got Reese's sticks. You name it, Brad Reese has eaten it. So he noticed these spin-off products a couple years ago. His spin-off products started tasting a little different. So he starts looking at the ingredient list on these things. No longer does it say milk chocolate on the Reese's sticks now. Now it says chocolate candy. Slight difference, but pretty important. No longer is there peanut butter in the Reese's stick. Now it's peanut butter cream. So it turns out chocolate gets more expensive. There's a drought in Ghana in West Africa where a lot of chocolate comes from. You got tariffs coming into chocolate, so it's all increasing the price of chocolate. So Hershey's innovates with their ingredients. So it turns out the FDA regulates what you can call milk chocolate. Reese's found cheaper ways to coat their candy with vegetable oils and other things. So now they can't call it milk chocolate. Now they have to call it chocolate candy. At first they tried inflation, passing on the cost to the consumers. Then they tried shrinkflation. You've all heard of this, right? You shrink the size of your product and charge the same price. That all failed to increase profits enough for Hershey, so they moved to skimpflation. Skimping on the expensive ingredients and still charging you the same amount of money. They didn't mess with the OG though. The original Reese's cup still is milk chocolate and peanut butter. So just be careful when you're reaching for these Frankenstein Reese's products. You're not getting milk chocolate anymore. You're getting chocolate candy. So with that, turn it over to Felix.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Good afternoon, East Chapel Hill. I'm glad to be back and sincerely thankful to our leadership team, David Badua, Bob Slater, and Linda Sanders for allowing me to take a well-deserved break. Appreciate your leadership. A couple of announcements. First is to thank our generous anonymous donor for the teacher supply store. We were able to get additional gift cards of $25 each to appreciate our teachers, and want to thank Allison here and Maddie and the East Chapel Hill team for making that happen. Maddie, Allison, we arrange a day where we can do kind of like a presentation and a photo shoot to just appreciate our teachers. So thank you so much. And on April 24th, we are going to take our program from here to the new Chapel Hill Police Department. So we're not going to meet here. We are going to go to the new building. And Randy has more information. Randy, you want to share some more information?
Sure.
You want to come here?
Hello, so there's some logistical issues going to the police department that we need to deal with. So I'll be sending everybody a email next week, because we have to know who's coming. And all you have to do, I'm gonna make it really simple, just email me back with, your name and that you're coming, and we'll be in good shape, all right? So, and there'll be more information as we get closer to the 24th. On where to enter, where to park, all of that. So look forward to it. Remember to email me back though, thanks.
Thanks, Randy. It's going to be fun. And also next week, a handful of us will be going to the annual district conference in Atlantic Beach, North Carolina. So if you don't see some of the familiar faces next week, will be down at the coast. A couple more announcements. Cliff?
The green team was at my house and somebody left this.
Oh, thank you. On the owner. Any more announcements? All right, I'm going to call upon Randy again to introduce our guest speaker.
Hello. I'm too short for this, so I'm on my toes.
Dennis, push it down,
Oh, okay. I was trying to make it easy. So before I introduce our guest today, who is a friend of so many of ours, and as Felix already mentioned, his wonderful wife, Allison, is here. Now, after Ford talks, who I'm going to introduce, Allison will be selling the books after the meeting. If you want to get one, she'll be set up right over here. So now, Ford Worthy. This man is pretty amazing. He has done so much. He's been a journalist, a little bit of time as a venture capitalist, securities lawyer, and then a biotech venture capitalist. But he's here today to speak about a book that he has written about his dad in Germany. So Ford Worthy, it's your show.
Thank you, Randy. Step out here. Well, it's really great to be here. It's been a long time since I was at a Rotary event, and in fact, it was about 2015. It was exactly 2015, and it turned out to be one of the high points of my life as a parent, actually, because it was in that year. It was the fall of 2015. The Teacher Supply Store, which had been up and running for probably 7 or 8 years at that point, and Allison, of course, was very involved in it, and my daughter, our daughter Sophie, had also been involved, and you all recognized her with a Paul Harris Fellow Award. And again, as a parent, to have your daughter recognized for her service to her community, you know, there was nothing better. And so I really thank you for that. Our family has, you know, long appreciated everything that you do, your commitment to Chapel Hill. So I'm going to talk for a few minutes, and then we'll have a Q&A. My favorite part of these talks, I've been giving them all over the state since this book came out about 6 months ago. But my favorite part is the Q&A. So I want you, I know there's some very sharp questioners in this audience, because I know many of you, and I want you to have some questions lined up for you. So the book that I've written, In Search of a Boy Named Chester, it's based on a distant memory. We all have a distant memory of someone. You know, it could be a long ago neighbor, a family member perhaps, could be someone who we were once in love with 30, 40, 50 years ago. It could be somebody who we had just a chance encounter, whom we've wondered about, you know, what happened to that person. Well, this book is based on a distant memory. It's my father's memory, and it's a memory of a fleeting encounter, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about it, but a fleeting encounter with a young boy whose name was Chester. It was an encounter that lasted only 8 hours, but it stayed with my father for nearly 80 years. And I'm going to try to remember, if I have the slides here. I have a rule here: never get uptight or frustrated with technology. But here's Sophie. Thank you, Felix. And here's my father at age 99. This is a couple of years ago.
Wait, how old is
He was 99. In this picture, he was 99. This was at his 99th birthday. He was actually 99 in September of 2023. So he told me this story for the very first time. I'd never heard it. He was a great storyteller, and I'd heard most all of his stories. He told me this story in June of 2024. This was just 3 months before he was to turn 100 years old. Now, he turned 18 in 1942. And like all of his friends, he was eager to sign up for the war. You can kind of imagine, you know, those particular times. So he enrolled in the V-12 program at UNC Chapel Hill. And then in 1944, after finishing midshipman school in New York City, the Navy sent him as an ensign to serve aboard an oil tanker in the Pacific. And again, my technology skills are sometimes challenging. This is a photo of his oil tanker. It's in the right background, and it's refueling the USS Wisconsin. And you know, we think about refueling, and they were underway when this maneuver was going. We think about airplanes today refueling in flight, and it's just a common everyday thing. The same thing is true now with ships. But during World War II, that was actually an important innovation. It was Admiral Nimitz's idea originally, my research shows, and it allowed our fleet to continue in hot pursuit of the Japanese, which was quite meaningful in the course of the war. So the Navy sent him to the USS Lackawanna in the Pacific, and he celebrated, after the war ended, he celebrated his 21st birthday 20 days after it ended, 20 days after the Japanese surrendered in Tokyo Bay. He was in Tokyo Bay, not actually on the day of the surrender. His fleet, his tanker steamed in about 10 days later. But he was there. He was just a kid. He just turned 21 years old. And here, let's see, on the left here, this is what he looked like when he returned to San Francisco on October 24th. He immediately went to the barber, and this is what he looked like immediately afterwards on the far right. So in my 20 minutes, I'm going to tell you the story that Dad told me in June of 24. That's the launching pad that led directly to my book. And along the way, I'm going to give you a brief taste In 20 minutes is only so much you can say, but a brief taste of how I went about searching for this person named Chester. This is a postcard, and if you look at it, it's also the cover of the book. If you look at it real closely, the image to the right, you can see that it records the exact day and time that my dad's ship returned to the United States after years of war, October 24th, 1945. And if you look really closely, you can see that he doctored this picture so that the silhouette of the ship, this is a postcard, so that the ship that was sailing under the bridge resembled his actual oil tanker. And he loved to tell me the story about coming back to America on this particular day. All 200 members of this crew were on deck in a Navy tradition. And they were all, in this case, they were all singing San Francisco, Open Your Golden Gate. Just a wonderful, wonderful image. He was desperate, he told me, to get home. He hadn't seen his parents and his girlfriend for a long, long time. But there were hundreds, thousands and thousands of servicemen, and they were men who were coming back. They were pouring into San Francisco. Every plane, train, bus, car, everything was booked up. Hard to get back. He had been given a brief home leave to his small town in eastern North Carolina, Washington, North Carolina. But everything was booked solid. But he was fortunate that one of his shipmates was engaged at that time to a woman who worked for United Airlines. And she said, Ford, his name was also Ford, Ford, go to the airport, and I will try to pull some strings to at least get you started on this trip back to the east. So my dad, he was decked out in his Navy dress uniform, which was how they always traveled. He headed to the airport. He was there for hours and hours until an airline employee approached him and introduced him to a woman who, as Dad recounted this story to me again in June of 24, said that she would like to volunteer to give up her seat to him on a flight from San Francisco to Omaha. And when he told me this story, he told me that the woman gave up her seat as a gesture of patriotic appreciation. You know, the war had just ended. It just ended a few weeks earlier. There was one condition, though. There was one catch. My dad would have to take responsibility for her young son, who was traveling right there with her. He was about 10 years old. His name was Chester. And my father would have to be responsible for making sure that Chester arrived safely in Omaha to his grandmother, who supposedly would be waiting for him at the Omaha airport. So Dad, again, he was just crazy to get home. You can just imagine, just yearning to get home. And so without giving him a second thought, he said, "We got a deal." He agreed to the proposition. The boy turned out to be just one of those incredibly precocious kids. Again, my dad reckoned or remembered that he was about 10 years old. He knew everything that you could imagine about airplanes. Just incredibly precocious. And before they even took off, he was explaining how ailerons worked. Those are the flaps that help with the maneuverability of an airplane. And by the time they reached the first stop in Las Vegas, where my dad already needed a drink, and he got off the plane, left Chester aboard, got off the plane, went to the airport bar, got a drink, came back, and Chester was already calling him Daddy. And my father, for his part, was beginning to wonder how his life was about to change. So they landed in Omaha late at night, just before midnight, and no one was there to claim Chester. And Dad told me that he agonized over what to do. He made this solemn, in his mind, solemn vow that he was going to take care of this boy. He agonized over what he should do. Should he turn him over to the police, to the airline? Should he take him with me? And when he said that, I said, "Dad, surely you didn't contemplate taking him with you." But he said he did. And in fact, he was scheduled to board the next flight, a military flight, which was going to leave at 2 or 3 in the morning. And he made his decision. that he was going to take Chester with him. And then he sort of jokingly said that he was going to have his mother raise the boy. And then, just as they were boarding the plane, Chester's grandmother shows up finally. And they said a very brief goodbye. And my dad never heard another word about the boy named Chester. So now we're going to fast forward. During the final years of his life, before he turned 100, he was living independently on Glenwood Avenue in Raleigh at a condo. My mother had died a few years earlier. And my sisters and I, we spent a lot of time with him during that period. We each had a regular day or regular night where we tried to spend a lot of quality time with him. My night each week was Monday. And those Monday nights, they became just such a treasure for me. They almost sacred, I would say. And I want to read a short passage from the book that describes this weekly ritual that my father and I had, again, in this period. Again, this is June of 24, but we did this for a number of years, literally like clockwork, every single Monday. So from the book, every Monday night, I have dinner with my father at his home in Raleigh, North Carolina. Monday is my night, and my three sisters each have their nights. When my father tells others about his dinner schedule, he says he wishes he had had 3 more children to cover the full week. I usually show up around 4:30 or 5, prepare a simple dinner for the 2 of us, and then around 10, or often later, head back to my home 30 miles away, here in Chapel Hill. I see him at other times, of course, but over the past few years, these 5 or 6 hours have become more special than I could ever have imagined. It's a time for me to tell him not only about what's going on in my life, but how I'm feeling about what's going on. It's a time for him to tell me the same about whatever's on his mind. No interruptions, no distractions, just him and me, one-on-one, together at a time in our lives when neither of us is rushed. We can savor even the smallest moments. So, those evenings, again, they were just such a treasure to me. They were almost always filled with stories. And some of those stories have been repeated many, many times. But this one was new. And so on a lark, on just this whim, I'm not sure what I was thinking or why, I told Dad, look, Dad, I'm not only going to find this boy, because my father also told me that he had wondered repeatedly what happened, what had become of this boy with whom he had this brief encounter. And when he traveled on business to San Francisco, he would always, look in phone books and city directories and so forth. So this boy had been on his mind for literally 80 years. And I said, Dad, I'm not only going to find him, but I'm going to do a deep dive, and I'm going to come back to you and tell this boy's entire life story. It was sort of half serious. It was half serious because my father's 100th birthday was coming up just a few months away, and I was looking for a unique gift. What do you give somebody who's about to turn 100? But I think on the other hand, it was one of those promises that I think both of us assumed would be forgotten before I made my way out his condo door later that night. And I certainly never sat down to write a book. Never crossed my mind. So I started with very little. A boy named Chester, about 10 years old. This is what we knew. A mother around 30. An encounter at the San Francisco airport, and then the handoff in Omaha. And then, importantly, my father believed that the boy's last name was Park. I was intrigued by the idea of using Facebook to crowdsource this search. I was not in fact, I think I had posted on Facebook maybe once in my life. I was definitely not a regular. I was a novice. But as Randy said, I had a long career in the venture capital industry. I was very familiar with the power of networks. And I thought, well, gosh, this is the perfect opportunity to sort of turn the crowd loose, to have the crowd take a crack at finding this boy. And the boy, by the way, would have been about 90 years old. So I assumed that one of 2 things would happen. Either someone on Facebook would immediately recognize this story, that was possible, or more likely, nothing at all would ever come of it. Instead, people from all over the country started writing me, mostly on Facebook, but others found my, contact information. I began hearing from people from all over. Some people offered encouragement. Some people shared similar stories. And some complete strangers to me and to my father began helping me search. They just dived into this. And that was when I realized that, I had something on my hands and maybe I should begin taking this project a little bit more seriously. So I began chasing leads. And meanwhile, I also began delving through, sort of mining my father's old papers. He had extensive archives. And I fully expected to find something useful because he wrote everything down. Everything down. You have to read the book just to understand what I mean when I say everything. He not only wrote things down, but he seemed also to file away just about any and every piece of paper that came into his hands. For example, in his files, there were over 600 letters. These were letters to him from his parents, and from him to his parents, all written just in the space of a few years during the war. And for a while, I became convinced that my father's Chester was a man named Chester Park from Greenleaf, Kansas. And by that point, my research had told me that this particular Chester, his story fit what I thought I was looking for uncannily well. And eventually I connected with his daughter. I persuaded her to engage with me. We exchanged emails. It was kind of exhilarating. We both thought we had found the right Chester, my father's Chester. And then deep in my dad's files, I found something else. I had been expecting to find lots of additional information. I found a letter. This was an unfinished letter, and this is an image of it. A letter, and it had some new details. It had been written just a few weeks after this trip. It had been written by my dad. It was unfinished. It had apparently never been mailed, and it added new details, some crucial details that were very helpful for my search. And those details ruled out this Chester from Kansas. Now, until that moment, until that particular moment, I had thought of this story. I really thought of it as an investigation. And it was a kind of a detective tale. What I was doing, I was using my training as a journalist, started out as a journalist, and as a lawyer, to find somebody from the distant past, with the help of a few clues, but not many clues. That's what I thought I was doing. My interaction with the daughter of the Chester from Kansas, though, she completely changed my understanding of the story that I was telling. She sensed, before I did, that this was actually a lot more than a detective story. And to be sure, it was a detective story, but it had a lot of other layers. It was a story about memory and connection and family, and then about other very different ideas like data and privacy. And then on another level, it was a story about trust, a really important aspect of the story that I eventually told. And then on yet another still deeper level, and I had understood this, it was a story about my relationship with my father, about really more broadly, you could say, about the relationship between a father and a son. I still didn't understand the full arc of the story. I was posting on a weekly basis, roughly speaking, on Facebook at that point. I didn't know what I was going to post next, or even if I was going to post next. But I made a really deliberate and conscious decision that as I came across these interesting sort of strands that might not be directly related to the search, I would try to weave them into the story I was telling while I would continue to prosecute the forensic investigation. That was really important. And so, for example, I'll give you an example of what I mean by a strand that on the surface might not seem completely related to the story, but it was actually intimately related. it's a story, it's really a glimpse of my own early story about how, as a teenager, kind of in my mid-teens, I had known exactly, or at least I thought I knew exactly what I wanted to do for a career. I had dreamed of becoming a writer for Fortune magazine. Not a lot of kids probably have that dream, but I did. And so I told in the story and ultimately in the book about traveling to New York in the senior year, my senior year at UNC, to interview with accounting firms there. And while there, I stopped at Fortune to meet the woman who was in charge of hiring entry-level researchers. Her name was Mary E. Johnston. And I let Mary know, I stopped just for a very brief visit. I let her know that I was in New York, I was interviewing for an accounting job in Paris, didn't want to work as an accountant, with apologies to any of you who are accountants. I had no interest in that. So I thought, well, I'll try to get an accounting job in Paris. There, in 2 or 3 years, I'll learn French. I'll come back with a CPA. And then I will go back to Mary E. Johnston and I'll ask her if I am qualified at that point to be a member of her staff. And 2 weeks after that short meeting, remember, I didn't know that I didn't think I was interviewing for a job with her, but 2 weeks later, and just a week or so before one of those accounting firms offered me a job, Mary called me and she asked me to come work with her. And she completely changed the trajectory of my life. That's where I met Allison, among many other ways that she changed the trajectory. So what made this diversion from the Chester story so relevant to the Chester story was that it was at Fortune where I learned how to do research, where I learned how to back up what we published with just exhaustively documented facts. And so in my search for Chester, what I was doing was trying to live up to those same high standards that I had learned from my original and dear mentor and ultimately great friend, Mary Johnston. The details from the newly discovered letter allowed me to take a rough pass at calculating the odds that any one person might be my father's Chester. How many people, here I'll click to another slide. This by the way, is a cover story that I wrote for Fortune in 1987 that was a finalist for the National Magazine Award. This is a picture of an image from the U.S. Census. So how many people, there were 140 million people in the U.S. at that time, in 1945, could check all of these boxes? This is what we knew. A boy, about 10, according to my father, but for my analysis, I assumed he was between 8 and 12. A mother, about 30, but I assumed a woman between 25 and 35 years old, who was divorced. That was a detail that I picked up from that unfinished letter that I discovered, and whose mother, this would be Chester's grandmother, lived in Omaha, or at least within a plausible distance of the Omaha airport. So in the book, I have a lot of fun going into all the nitty-gritty, statistics and all the mathematical calculations. But at the same time, I'll just cut right to the chase. I concluded that the odds suggested that out of 140 million people, just one would likely check all of those boxes. Just one person. That was what who I was looking for. One person out of 140 million people. So, just a quick show of hands. How many of you were born before April 1st, 1940? When I go to retirement communities, I've been speaking a lot. It's like 75, 80% of the audience. So this is a young crowd. That makes you all feel good. So what's significant about that date? Well, the 1940 census, which was taken on April 1st, the early days of April of 1940, that was the first U.S. census in which my father's Chester could have appeared. You think about it, he was roughly 10 in 1945, he was born in the 30s. So the very first census in which he could have appeared was the 1940 census. And the personal details of that census were released only in 2012. That's called the 72-year rule. That means the first census in which my personal details will appear. I was born in 1956. Will be in 2032. So add 72 years, that's when the personal data that's collected is first released, the 72-year rule. So if I had tried to find Chester before 2012, I wouldn't have had a chance. And there's a really interesting connection with UNC, but I'll save that to the Q&A. Now, I also knew, based on Social Security Administration data, that in the year 1935, 1,432 males named Chester had been born in the U.S., which meant, based on the age range, this 5-year age range, I had assumed 8 to 12, that I was dealing with about 7,500 or say 8,000 prospects. And then I also looked at the mobility data among Americans at that time. It was very low then. Most people stayed put. They lived very close to where they were born. And so that suggested that I should begin vetting those 7,500 prospects by starting with cohorts born between 1933 and 1937 in California or Nebraska. They were the only two places that we knew for sure that Chester had a connection. So the search, and Allison can testify to this, it absolutely consumed me throughout the entire summer, correct, Allison? And at one point, she and Sophie, who you also know, they had me, we had what I experienced at Weaver Street Market, I think. And what I experienced as an intervention. And they made me promise to sort of bring this obsession to an end. And I said, look, I'll do it. I knew that I had at least one more post in me, maybe more. And I promised them that I would stop. But my fingers were crossed behind my back. I'm going to accelerate, through this long story and tell you that until near the end of this, I did almost all of my research in the evenings or on weekends. I was working through historical records, census data, newspaper archives. I probably consulted maybe 150 different newspapers and so many different editions of those newspapers that I can't even count. Military records, airline histories, professional directories, you name it. Anything that I thought might help situate a particular boy and his mother in exactly the right place at exactly the right time. I wasn't going for let's just make sure, generally speaking, that he's in a particular city in a particular year. I really was going for exactitude. One angle that I pursued towards that end, doggedly, was whether Chester's mother may have been an employee of United Airlines. And that mattered, and you can probably guess why. Because if she were a United Airlines employee, it could help explain how a mother could entrust her young child to this complete stranger. She would know that her United colleagues would be there sort of to watch over him as they made their way to Omaha, and then after they arrived at the Omaha airport. And to approach that question, I interviewed all sorts of people: district attorneys, prosecutors, journalists. I interviewed 2 UNC linguistics professors and had them meticulously go through, one of them diagrammed this unfinished letter. We were trying to understand the relationships of the people who were mentioned by my father in this letter, to try to see if we could unpack that and create some additional parameters that I could use in the search. This is my dad at his 100th birthday party. And when he turned 100, my sisters and I threw him a big celebration. And then earlier that same morning, I posted what I thought was the final installment of this story that I'd been telling. And the next day, Monday, a front page article about the search appeared in the News and Observer. Some of you may have seen it. It's by Josh Schaefer. It was a great story. It won all kinds of awards from the North Carolina Press Association. And I thought at that point that the story was finished. And then 7 weeks later, my father fell at dinner at his club. He got up from his table to go say hello to somebody across the room. You'd think, 100-year-old people would come to him. But he always went to people. And that was just a part of his core. He went to people. He was outreaching. He was a man for whom connections to people were just at his core of his identity. And he got up to go across the room to say hello, and he fell backwards. He took a terrible blow to his head, and 3 days later, he died. And several months after his death, as I was continuing, as I am even now, to absorb life without him, I realized that, I told the story about the boy named Chester and what became of him, but I hadn't said quite enough about what became of the young sailor, my father. And that's when I decided to expand the story into a short book. So as I said earlier, my favorite part of these talks is the Q&A. This, by the way, is my dad and mother in about 1954, right after they got married. So we're going to turn to Q&A, but I want to finish with some additional words. One of the questions that I get, maybe the question that I get most often, besides, well, did you find Chester? And I'm not going to tell you whether I found Chester. You got it.
Gotta read the book.
There's no free lunch here. You're going to have to deal with Allison, my book-selling wonderful wife, on that. But the question that I get most often, besides did you find Chester, is what did your father think of all this? I mean, this was a collaboration. We were working side by side for months on this. And it's important to know that in the early going, he was very, very skeptical, because he knew that the boy's name was Chester Park. And I'm not going to say more of that, but you can kind of imagine how the story might have unfolded. But what did he think about this? And to answer that question, I'm going to read a very short passage from the very end of the book, and that'll be how I conclude, and then have your questions lined up. So the context here, several months after he died, I was at his Raleigh condo. I was all by myself. My sisters and I had begun organizing. We began preparing to sell his place. And I wandered into this very well-organized, big walk-in closet. And this is what I say in the book. Deep in this same walk-in closet is an array of massive file cabinets, still to be gone through by me and my sisters before we sell Dad's place. I pull open several drawers, marveling at the sheer mass of paper within. The files are meticulously organized. He was the son of a librarian and the husband of a librarian. At the very rear of the bottom drawer of one of these file cabinets is a manila folder I've never noticed before. It is file number H266 and is labeled Chester Search. Inside this folder is a draft of several of the early chapters of our story and a clipping of the newspaper piece published the day after he turned 100. I remember reading that article to him that same evening. It was a Monday. And so I was reading it to him. And I write in the book, and I'm also thinking in real time, just how much that moment is still etched in my mind. It is as fresh today as if it happened yesterday. My memory of that moment is another of his many gifts to me. After I finished reading the article to him, he smiled and gave me his final verdict. I never bothered to tell you the story, he said, because it never seemed to be that interesting. But you took a good story made it into a great story. And so with that, I will conclude and take hopefully some good questions. I know Freddie Tiger will have And I asked Felix to plant at least one question. This will be a test of his presidency.
Well, you already mentioned you were gonna tell us about the UNC connection.
Oh,
So
yeah.
maybe you can go there and then we'll.
Love to do that. Thank you, Jennifer. So, I rely a lot on Ancestry. Many of you are familiar with Ancestry. Ancestry began, it was actually called, it was by a company of a different name, back in sort of the late 80s, I think. And it was started by a couple of graduates, I believe of Brigham Young. And what they did was they took genealogical data that was from the Mormon Church, and they began selling it on CD-ROMs out of the back of a station wagon. I have the story of this. And they continued doing that for a number of years. Anyway, in 1996, that company bought a small magazine publisher called Ancestry, and they changed the name, and so now the company going forward became Ancestry.com, actually originally. And they expanded, and some private equity firms got involved and put a lot of money into it. And they began the process of digitizing the U.S. Census, actually around 2000. Massive project. And in 2003, they recruited a guy named Tim Sullivan to come in and become the CEO of Ancestry, to really professionalize and really accelerate this effort to digitize literally billions of records from the U.S. Census, all the way back to 1790. And Tim Sullivan is a Moorhead scholar. And I have since gotten to know him and serve on a board, actually, within the board of the Assembly, which is a digital publication that I hope all of you are subscribers to. And it was through really Tim's, leadership that they accelerated that, and they got the very first digitized censuses out, in time for 2012 to produce the one that I mostly relied on. I also relied heavily on the 1950 census because it gave me the ability to triangulate. I had the 1940 personal data, and then in 2022, when the 1950 data came, I had that, and I was able to do a lot of really important triangulation. I couldn't have done the story if I had tried before 2012, for sure. And if I had tried before 2022, it would have been an uphill climb. I don't know how it would have come out. But anyway, that's what I was referring to. Thank you, Jennifer.
Board, my question is, here.
Yes.
My question follows on that, you partially answered my question, but, as you go through Ancestry, if you use Ancestry to track, it's a very painful process. Could you get access to the full digitized data set for 1940?
Yes, it's online. It's the full, as far as I know. Now, I'm not a historian. I'm not an authority. I don't hold myself out. But yes, it's digitized. And the census. Go ahead.
If you can go in and look up individuals. If you want to search the entire country,
You can go page by page.
but could you get access to the full data set and write, get somebody, you might write a program to search on all of those credentials that you just mentioned?
Well, of course, you can do it. It's a little bit laborious the way I did it. But I think what you're asking is, could you take it really as a whole and kind of search everything without any searching on individual parameters?
Yeah.
And I believe that the answer is yes. I feel sure that for research purposes, the researchers have that kind of access. But the access that the average guy, you know, you and I have is pretty formidable. And you can search on, I mean, the number of variables that can be searched for at a single stroke. There's a lot, and it's pretty formidable.
Yeah.
Cliff, or maybe somebody else. Well, yeah.
This person exists because Ford's grandfather hired her daddy. We found out we were having supper with him one time, and Linda mentioned that her daddy had grown up in Little Washington. And Ford said, "Well, my daddy knows everybody." And that was in, and this was back in the 1920s, I guess. But we called your dad, he was about 94 at the time. And he said, "Oh yeah, I remember Herman. Ford's grandfather had a pharmacy in Washington
Okay.
and hired Linda's daddy.
That's so crazy.
When their family moved to Wilmington, he was working in the pharmacy
That's
because of his granddaddy. And her mother was the pharmacist there, and they got married, and that's why she's here. She loved meeting her dad. You get all this because she said she's always running into my family. See, Dr. Sanchar up there right behind you, his wife's personal trainer is my cousin. And we went to Holy Tim and family one time, and she said, "Best thing about being out here, we won't run into your relatives." Next day, we met one of my cousins. So she was really glad to meet your dad.
My question is a personal observation. Most of us aren't fortunate enough to live to 90. Chester would have been about somewhere around 90. Was he alive?
Read the
Well, that would be a spoiler if I told you. It was a good. You know, but it prompts this observation. It prompts this observation on my part. You know, I live like all of us, I'm sure, very busy lives, professional lives. I lived outside of North Carolina until my sort of late 30s, but then I came back and I was here in the Triangle for, you know, many years. And in retrospect, I really put off spending that kind of time with my father until he was really in his early 90s, and I got lucky. You know, I really got lucky. I wish I didn't have to depend. I hadn't had to depend so much on luck, but I had an opportunity that many people don't have to spend that kind of time, that sort of rich, quality, undistracted time with a parent when I was undistracted or relatively so.
Ford, when given another UNC time, did you do most of your research from the house on your computer, or did you take advantage of anything within Wilson, Davis, undergraduate? Where did you venture out?
Well, my father and I did venture out, but it was the research that we did on the road, if you will, was in Washington, Little Washington. The research that I did otherwise was done at my home, you know, at Cup of Joe's, at, you know, the Open Eye, at coffee shops, and I'm also, I continue to be a practicing business person, and I'm very involved with the Assembly, as I said, and also with Pappas Capital, and so I did some of it there. But it was all online, you know, it was researching digital records. And at a certain point, and I won't spoil it too much, but at a certain point, you know, I got to a point where I was engaging not by email or just looking at dry records, but with, you know, with people who I was talking to. And that was one of the most gratifying parts of it. But I was able to do, at least 75 or 80% of it.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
Board, thanks so much. This has been really interesting. Some of the newer members might not know that the way this club used to give out Paul Harris Fellows was that the club would vote, I think I'm saying this properly, and award these based on service to the club or other criteria. And I just think it's amazing and fantastic that our club did that for your daughter. So I wonder if you just spend 30 seconds or so telling us, you mentioned that it was for her work on the teacher supplies board, but tell us a little bit about what she did that we rewarded her with that. I think the newer members of the club in particular would love to hear that.
Well, you really should be asking I should call Allison to the stage, because the teacher supply store goes back to about 2007 or so, is that right? And I don't know this for sure, but I believe that the Rotary, that you have been involved since the very beginning, is that right? It's such a great thing that you do, and the commitment year after year. I know it's expanded, you've expanded the sport, continue to do that work. It is really appreciated by our teachers and by our parents. So Sophie, being her mother's daughter, initially started, she was born in 1997, and so when the teacher supply store started, she was 10 years old. And, she was basically she was tagging along, not being dragged along, because she was, she had an energy and a commitment herself. I mean, again, in the spirit of her mother's example, to be someone who was giving to the community, even as a young child. And so she started tagging along to, set up, on the actual day of the teacher supply store, and continued to be involved on sale day, the setup period before the actual sale day, and then during each sale day. So by the time that you recognized her with that wonderful award, she was a veteran. She had been intimately involved in the teacher supply store for maybe 8 or 9 years or so. So that was what I think you were recognizing her for. But again, as a parent, to see a young child take an interest in service, it doesn't get much better than that.
One last question.
For one last question about your dad. I'm fascinated about the book, but first when the picture of your dad comes up, and the Bible says, goodness gracious, he couldn't possibly be that age. I won't say we're obsessed about longevity, but we hear about it all the time now. And what's your dad's secret sauce? I mean, is it diet, exercise, G's?
Well, I have thought a lot about that. Actually, as part of the process of doing this book, and I have concluded that I'll say a couple of things that probably figured into it, but it's not my ultimate, most important reason. The things that figured into it was he had good genes. His mother lived to be 98 years old. He had some other relatives further back that lived, well into their 90s. So he had good genes. He worked out every single day. Every single day. He didn't begin working out every single day, but from the point of roughly his early 80s until he died at just after 100, he worked out every single day for 24 minutes.
Be walking.
No, he went to a gym. The gym was very close by, and he would go and he would work on the elliptical, basically. He did elliptical for 24 minutes, and then he would, that was his exercise. Now, he did a lot of walking as well and other things, but that was another factor. So, good genes, good exercise, regular, every single day without fail exercise, and other things. But the secret sauce, I'm absolutely convinced, I have no doubt, was that he loved people, and he was constantly maintaining his circle and also expanding. He was one of those people who, as he grew older, his circle of friends and acquaintances actually got larger, very counterintuitive. And it was because he was actively cultivating. He would go, you know, when we were driving around, he might drive 10 miles just to go see someone, and he rarely gave them a lot of heads up. He would just show up, and they were always glad to see him. But I think, to me, it was that engagement with people and those connections that were really the secret sauce.
Thank you so much, Paul. And as we celebrate the every birthday, happy birthday in advance, Mr. Paul. Your birthday is next week, April 16th.
April 16th.
Happy birthday. Thank you for coming.
Show me how to turn it on.
Yes.
Just hit the X.
Yes.
And?
And